At exactly 8:42 a.m., my mother-in-law leaned toward my husband and smiled. Then she looked straight at me across Courtroom 3B in Fairfax County and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "You're here alone, Rebecca. This should be over in 20 minutes." A couple sitting behind her chuckled. I tightened my grip on the worn leather folder in my hands and kept walking. Sharon Lawson always believed silence meant weakness. She had no idea silence had once been part of my job. The courtroom smelled like old wood, fresh coffee, and damp umbrellas. It had rained all morning in Northern Virginia. I brushed droplets from my navy blazer before taking my seat at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle sat my husband of 15 years. David wouldn't look at me. That hurt more than Sharon's little performance ever could. 3 months earlier, if someone had told me I'd be sitting across from my own husband in court, I would have laughed. We weren't perfect, but we'd built a quiet life together in Alexandria. Saturday mornings meant grocery shopping at Wegmans. Sunday afternoons meant driving along the George Washington Parkway just because we liked the view of the Potomac. It wasn't exciting. It was home. Or at least I thought it was. The judge hadn't entered yet. Lawyers chatted near the bench while the bailiff arranged files. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:44. 2 minutes until everything officially began. Sharon crossed one elegant leg over the other and gave me another satisfied smile. She'd dressed for the occasion. Cream-colored suit, pearl necklace, gold cross pinned to her jacket. If someone had walked in off the street, they would have thought she was the sweetest grandmother in Virginia. I knew better. "So," she called softly, "your lawyer finally realized you couldn't win." I looked at her. "My attorney had a scheduling conflict." "Oh," she said with a dramatic nod. "Convenient." David shifted in his chair. "Mom," what Sharon shrugged. "I'm just asking." He sighed but said nothing else. That was becoming a habit. David used to speak up when she crossed a line. Somewhere over the last year he stopped. Looking back, I still can't pinpoint exactly when our marriage began slipping away. People imagine marriages end after one terrible fight. Ours ended in tiny pieces, his mother criticizing dinner, her questioning every purchase we made, her reminding David that I'd inherited my father's waterfront cottage in Maryland. "Interesting," she'd say. "Your father left that only to Rebecca." Or, "I wonder how much that property's worth now." Always smiling, always planting another seed. When my dad passed away the previous fall, I was devastated. The cottage in St. Michael's wasn't luxurious. It was a weathered little place overlooking a narrow inlet where I'd learned to fish with him when I was 8. The porch sagged. The roof leaked. The kitchen still had avocado green appliances from the 70s. To Sharon, it was real estate. To me, it smelled like old cedar coffee and my father's aftershave. There was never any question of selling it. Apparently, Sharon had other ideas. She started telling David that married couples shouldn't have secret assets. She called my inheritance unfair. Then she suggested I probably had other accounts she wasn't telling anyone about. It sounded ridiculous. Until David started asking questions. At first they were casual. Then they became specific. "Do you have another retirement account? Did your military benefits include property? Were there overseas payments while you were deployed?" Questions that didn't sound like they came from him. Because they didn't. I knew exactly whose voice I was hearing. One evening I finally asked him, "Did your mother tell you to ask me this?" He hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. I opened every financial record we owned. Savings, checking, retirement, tax returns, insurance policies. I even showed him paperwork I'd never shared with anyone because I believed spouses shouldn't have secrets. He looked through everything, then quietly said, "Mom still thinks something doesn't add up." I remember staring at him. Not angry, just tired. "David," I asked, "since when does your mother audit our marriage?" He didn't answer. 2 weeks later, I was served with divorce papers, irreconcilable differences, a request to examine marital assets, and buried halfway through the filing language challenging ownership of the cottage my father had left me before he died. I sat in my kitchen for nearly an hour reading those pages over and over. Not because I didn't understand them, because I couldn't believe David had signed them. My attorney Linda Pierce had assured me we'd respond properly. Then 3 days before today's hearing, she called. "I hate doing this, Rebecca." "What happened?" "My father's in the hospital in North Carolina. I'm already on Interstate 95 heading south." I closed my eyes. "Go be with him?" "I filed a continuance request." "It was denied." "I'm afraid so." She paused. "You can handle the preliminary hearing yourself. Nothing substantive should happen." "Should." "I know. She sounded almost guilty. I didn't blame her. Life happens. So here I was. One leather folder. One marriage ending. One mother-in-law enjoying every second of it. The courtroom door opened. All rise. Everyone stood. The judge entered. As we sat back down, Sharon leaned toward David and whispered something that made her smile again. She looked absolutely certain she was about to watch me lose everything. For the first time that morning, I felt something besides sadness. Not anger. Resolve. Because there was one thing Sharon had never understood about me. She thought quiet people broke easily. Sometimes quiet people simply learned long ago that speaking only matters when the moment is right. And mine was getting closer. The judge postponed most of the arguments that morning. My attorney's emergency request had been denied, but after reviewing the filings, the judge decided both sides needed more documentation before moving forward. He scheduled another hearing 3 weeks later. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a defeat either. As people filed out of the courtroom, I finally stood. My legs felt heavier than they should have. Sharon walked past me with David close behind her. She smiled without slowing down. "Enjoy the extra time, Rebecca, you'll need it." David opened his mouth almost as if he wanted to say something. Instead, he followed his mother into the hallway. I watched them disappear around the corner before letting out the breath I'd been holding for what felt like an hour. Outside, the rain had stopped. The courthouse steps were still wet, reflecting patches of blue sky breaking through the clouds. I sat on a bench overlooking Chain Bridge Road and pulled out my phone. There were 3 missed calls, one from my attorney, one from work, one from a number I hadn't seen in nearly 4 years, General Samuel Whitaker. I smiled despite myself. Only one man still insisted on calling from a landline. I returned the call. He answered after the second ring. "Colonel Lawson, you know I don't answer to that anymore. You'll always answer to it." I laughed quietly. "I heard about your hearing." News traveled surprisingly fast among retired military lawyers. "I was hoping you hadn't." "Too late." We talked for a few minutes about ordinary things. His vegetable garden, my job at the defense contractor, the Washington Nationals who were somehow managing another disappointing season. Then his voice became more serious. "Tell me something." "What? Why haven't you told your husband?" I looked across the parking lot where courthouse employees were heading toward a food truck selling barbecue sandwiches. It never seemed important. "It wasn't important to you." "No, but it should have been important to him." I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure anymore. People often assume military service is something veterans want to talk about. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it isn't. When I graduated from William and Mary Law School, I had offers from private firms in Richmond and Washington. Instead, I joined the Army. My mother cried. My father simply nodded. If you're going to do something, he told me do it all the way. I took that advice more seriously than he probably intended. Most of my first assignments weren't glamorous. Paperwork. Military justice hearings, legal reviews, long nights inside offices where the coffee tasted burned no matter who made it. Eventually, I joined the Judge Advocate General's Corps full-time. The work became harder, then stranger. Fraud investigations, contract corruption, assault cases, officers who believed rank made them untouchable. It didn't. Not if I had anything to say about it. Years later, I was assigned to larger international investigations involving violations of military law during overseas operations. People hear the phrase war crimes and imagine television dramas. The reality is painfully ordinary. Thousands of pages of evidence. Interviews that lasted entire days. Photographs you wished you could forget. Families waiting years for answers. There wasn't much glory in it. Mostly responsibility. And the constant awareness that every decision affected real people. Sometimes American families, sometimes families halfway around the world. I learned early that emotions couldn't decide cases. Facts had to. That lesson stayed with me long after I left the Army. It also explained something Sharon never understood. I didn't react every time someone insulted me. I'd spent 2 decades learning patience. Compared to hostile witnesses and international investigations, my mother-in-law's sharp tongue barely registered. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I met David at a charity fundraiser in Arlington. He wasn't flashy. Didn't try too hard. He worked as a civil engineer and spent 20 minutes explaining why people underestimated the importance of bridge maintenance. It was oddly charming. On our 3rd date, he asked about my career. I work for the Army. Doing what? Legal. Oh, that was it. No interrogation. No fascination. Just acceptance. Over the years, he occasionally asked about deployments. I usually answered with broad descriptions. I handled military prosecutions. Were they difficult? Some were. He respected my boundaries, or so I believed. Maybe I mistook silence for understanding. Maybe he decided it wasn't worth asking. Either way, neither of us imagined his mother would someday fill those empty spaces with her own imagination. 3 days after the hearing, Sharon hosted her weekly church luncheon. I wasn't invited. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was getting a phone call afterward from my neighbor Linda Matthews. "Rebecca." She sounded uncomfortable. "I think you should know something." "What happened?" "I was helping serve desserts." Linda attended the same church. She lowered her voice. "Sharon told everyone you exaggerated your military career." I stared out my kitchen window. "What exactly did she say?" "She told people you mostly did office work." I almost laughed. Linda continued. "Then she said you probably called yourself a prosecutor because it sounded impressive." And people believed her. I thanked Linda before hanging up. For several minutes, I stood perfectly still. Not because strangers doubted me, because Sharon had reached the point where embarrassing me publicly wasn't enough. She wanted to rewrite my life. That evening, David came by to pick up more of his belongings. He carried empty boxes through the living room while I wrapped dishes in newspaper. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke. "Mom says people in the military sometimes exaggerate what they actually did." I slowly put down the plate in my hands. "Does she know anything about military law?" "No." "Has she ever asked me?" "No." "So why does her opinion matter more than mine?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I just think—" "No," I interrupted gently. "I think someone has been telling you stories for months." He looked genuinely conflicted. "I don't know what to believe anymore." That sentence hurt more than I'd expected. 15 years together. And somehow, a woman who had never worn a uniform knew my life better than I did. After David left, I drove to Fort Belvoir. The post looked almost exactly the way I remembered. The security gates, the brick buildings, the flags moving gently in the evening breeze. I parked near a quiet overlook and sat inside my car. The sun was beginning to set. Orange light reflected across the windshield. I wondered whether I should simply tell everyone the truth. Show them the photographs, the commendations, the assignments, the retirement ceremony. It would end the rumors overnight. But another voice inside me resisted. It felt too much like proving myself to people who had already decided who I was. The next morning, General Whitaker invited me to breakfast at Bob and Edith's diner in Arlington. He still ordered pancakes bigger than the plate. After listening without interrupting, he folded his napkin. "Rebecca." "What?" "Truth doesn't become arrogance just because someone else underestimated you." I looked down at my coffee. "I don't want to sound like I'm bragging." "You aren't." He smiled. "You're simply refusing to let someone else write your biography." For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not confidence. Not yet. But maybe permission. Permission to stop apologizing for a life I'd earned. I just didn't realize the next hearing would force that decision sooner than I expected. 3 weeks later, I pulled into the Fairfax County Courthouse parking garage at 8:05 on a Tuesday morning. This time the sky was clear. The kind of crisp Virginia morning that makes you think maybe the day is going to cooperate with you. I knew better. I sat in my car for another minute with both hands resting on the steering wheel. On the passenger seat was the same brown leather folder I'd carried to the last hearing, only now it was thick enough that the clasp barely closed. Bank statements, property records, tax returns, copies of my father's will. Everything my attorney Linda Pierce had asked me to organize. She was back from North Carolina, thankfully. Her father was recovering after emergency heart surgery, and seeing her waiting outside the courthouse gave me more comfort than I wanted to admit. "You look tired," she said after giving me a quick hug. "I've had better months," she smiled. "I've seen clients show up looking much worse." We walked through security together. As we reached the second floor, Linda stopped. "One more thing." "What?" "The judge reviewing today's motions is Judge Harold Bennett." The name sounded familiar. Then it clicked. "Oh, you know him?" "I haven't seen him in years." She looked surprised. "I thought you said you barely knew anyone in civilian courts." "I don't." I hesitated. I knew him before he became a state judge. Linda raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. She'd learned that if I wanted to explain something from my Army years, I would. If I didn't, asking wouldn't help. Courtroom 3B looked busier than before. Several attorneys were already seated because another case involving a government contractor had just ended next door. People moved in and out carrying boxes of documents. Clerks hurried between courtrooms. Linda and I took our seats. Across the aisle, David was quietly speaking with his attorney. When he looked up and saw me, he offered a small nod. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. For a second, I caught a glimpse of the man I'd married. Then Sharon walked in. She carried herself like she owned the building. Her perfume reached us before she did. "Rebecca," she said brightly. I looked up. "I heard you found another lawyer." "My original lawyer." "Oh." She smiled politely. "That's probably for the best." Linda leaned toward me. "Is she always like this? Worse at Christmas." Linda covered a laugh with a cough. That tiny moment almost made me smile. Almost. The bailiff announced the judge would be entering shortly. Everyone stood. Judge Bennett walked through the side door carrying a stack of files. He looked older than I remembered. More gray hair. Reading glasses balanced near the end of his nose. But the way he scanned a room hadn't changed at all. Years earlier, that careful attention had made him one of the best military judges I'd ever worked with. He sat. "Good morning." "Good morning, Your Honor," the courtroom answered. He began reviewing the morning calendar. Then his eyes stopped. On me. There was a brief pause, just long enough for me to wonder if he recognized me. His expression softened. A genuine smile crossed his face. "Good morning, Colonel Lawson." The room became perfectly still. I stood automatically. "Good morning, Your Honor." For several seconds, nobody moved. The silence felt strangely loud. Judge Bennett looked back down at his calendar as though nothing unusual had happened. "Counsel, are both parties ready to proceed?" Linda answered first. "Yes, Your Honor." David's attorney nodded. "We are." Only then did I glance across the aisle. David was staring at me. Not angrily. Confused. Sharon looked as though someone had quietly pulled the floor out from under her chair. She blinked twice, then leaned toward David. "What did he call her?" David whispered back. I don't know." The hearing moved forward. Judge Bennett treated everyone exactly the same. He didn't favor me. He didn't even mention our previous professional relationship again. If anything, he was more careful than usual to make sure every ruling was fully explained. That was exactly the man I remembered. Professional to the core. Still, the atmosphere had changed. During a short recess, attorneys gathered near the coffee station outside the courtroom. One older lawyer kept glancing in my direction before finally walking over. "Excuse me?" "Yes." "Were you Rebecca Lawson with the Army JAG Corps?" "I was." He smiled. "I thought I recognized you." We shook hands. "I'm Michael Sanders. We never worked together directly, but I attended one of your lectures at Fort Belvoir years ago." I laughed softly. I'd forgotten I ever gave lectures. "You talked about handling complex military prosecutions." His face became more serious. "One of my associates still uses your case materials during trial preparation." Before I could answer, another attorney joined us. I knew I'd seen that name before. He pointed gently toward me. "You handled that procurement corruption case overseas, didn't you?" "I was part of the prosecution team." "That was incredible work." I thanked him politely. Nothing more. Compliments about old cases always made me uncomfortable. Those victories had come at enormous cost to many families. They were never stories I enjoyed revisiting. Across the hallway, Sharon was watching every second. She couldn't hear the conversation. She didn't need to. She saw respected attorneys greeting me like an old colleague. She saw people smiling, shaking my hand, asking about cases I'd handled. For the first time since I'd known her, Sharon looked uncertain. When the recess ended, everyone returned inside. As we passed one another, Sharon stepped into my path. "Rebecca." "Yes." "I didn't realize—" She searched for words. "You never mentioned being a colonel." "I wasn't hiding it." She frowned. "Well, why wouldn't you tell people?" I thought about that for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because it wasn't the most important thing about me." She stared. Apparently that wasn't the answer she'd expected. "I suppose," she said awkwardly. "That's admirable." It almost sounded like a compliment. Almost. I nodded politely and walked around her. Behind me, I heard Linda whisper under her breath. "I've never seen anyone look so confused." Neither had I. The afternoon session focused mostly on financial disclosures and scheduling. Nothing dramatic happened. No speeches. No courtroom surprises. Just documents, deadlines, and legal procedure. But something subtle had shifted. David kept stealing glances toward me. Not with suspicion. With questions. Questions he should have asked years ago. As we gathered our papers to leave, he finally caught up with me near the elevator. "Rebecca." I stopped. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at him quietly. "I thought you trusted me enough not to need a resume." The elevator doors opened. Neither of us moved. He looked down at the floor. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything today. I stepped inside with Linda. The doors began closing. Just before they shut completely, I saw Sharon standing behind her son. Her confidence was gone, but something else had taken its place. Calculation. She wasn't finished. Not even close. And before the next hearing, she'd make an accusation so serious that even 20 years of my military career wouldn't protect me from it. The phone rang at 7:18 on a Thursday morning while I was pouring coffee into my favorite blue mug. It was Linda. Her voice told me something was wrong before she even said hello. Rebecca, don't panic. I'll try. We received an amended filing from David's attorney late yesterday. I set the coffee pot down. What kind of filing? She took a slow breath. They're now alleging you concealed military income and overseas financial assets during the marriage. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. I'm sorry, what? They're claiming you failed to disclose foreign accounts connected to your military service. I stared at the rain dripping from the maple tree outside my kitchen window. That's impossible. I know. Every account I've ever had is listed on our tax returns. I know. So where did this come from? Linda paused. My guess, Sharon. I'd be shocked if it wasn't. I sank into a kitchen chair. After everything that had happened at the last hearing, I'd assumed Sharon would finally back off. Instead, she'd escalated. Not by insulting me. Not by gossiping. She'd turned suspicion into a legal accusation. And accusations, even false ones, have a way of taking on a life of their own. By noon, Linda and I were sitting in her office in Fairfax with documents spread across a conference table. She slid the amended complaint toward me. They specifically reference overseas compensation during your deployments. I read every page. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so completely detached from reality. They think classified assignments came with secret bank accounts. Linda smiled despite herself. I've heard stranger theories. I haven't. She tapped the paperwork. The problem isn't whether it's true. I know. It's whether we can prove it isn't. That was the part people outside the legal system often misunderstood. The truth doesn't automatically win. You still have to prove it. And proving something never existed can be surprisingly difficult. For the next 10 days, my life became paperwork. I requested pension records from the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. I ordered certified tax transcripts from the IRS. I dug through file cabinets that hadn't been opened since David and I moved into our house. One afternoon, I drove to the cottage in St. Michael's, hoping I'd left copies of old military records there. Instead, I found boxes of family photographs, fishing trips, Christmas mornings, pictures of my father teaching me how to paint the porch railing. I sat on the dusty living room floor much longer than I intended. There were moments over the past few months when I wondered if fighting for this little house was worth it. Then I'd see my dad smiling in one of those faded photographs, and I'd remember, some things aren't valuable because of what they're worth. They're valuable because of who loved them before you. The records I needed weren't arriving fast enough. Government agencies don't move because you're anxious. They move because it's Tuesday. Every afternoon I'd check the mailbox. Every afternoon there was another letter saying my request was being processed. Linda remained calm. We'll get them. What if we don't? We will. But what if they don't arrive before the hearing? She looked directly at me. Then we'll find another way. I appreciated her confidence. I just wasn't sure I shared it. The following Monday, another surprise landed in my mailbox. A notice scheduling mandatory mediation before the next hearing. David and Sharon were already seated when Linda and I arrived. The mediator, a retired judge named Ellen Brooks, welcomed everyone into a conference room. She believed most divorces could be resolved through conversation. I admired her optimism. For the first 30 minutes, we discussed ordinary issues: furniture, retirement accounts, vehicles. Then Sharon cleared her throat. We're still concerned about Rebecca's undisclosed military money. The mediator looked toward me. Mrs. Lawson. I folded my hands. There isn't any. Sharon smiled. Then proving that shouldn't be difficult. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic, frustration. Because she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't searching for truth. She was forcing me to defend myself against fiction. Linda calmly responded. We've requested official records. Sharon leaned back in her chair. If they exist. For the first time since this nightmare began, I nearly lost my temper. Nearly. Instead, I took a sip of water. Very slowly. Then I looked directly at Sharon. You've never asked me one honest question in 15 years. She blinked. You've simply decided what the answers should be. The room went quiet. Even David looked uncomfortable. The mediation ended without agreement. As we walked into the parking lot, David caught up with me. Rebecca! I stopped. I didn't know Mom was going to say all that. No, he shook his head. I thought this meeting was about dividing property. It should have been. He looked exhausted. I don't recognize any of this anymore. Neither did I. 2 days before the hearing, Linda called again. This time her voice sounded excited. I think we've got something. What happened? A retired defense finance officer contacted me. I frowned. How? He saw your name through a mutual colleague. The officer's name was Martin Alvarez. He'd spent 30 years with the Defense Finance and Accounting Service before retiring. He remembered processing retirement paperwork for senior judge advocate officers, mine included. I can't discuss classified assignments, he told us during a meeting in his Springfield office. But I absolutely can authenticate military pay records. He produced certified documents showing every paycheck, every retirement contribution, every pension calculation I'd ever received. Nothing hidden, nothing overseas, nothing remotely suspicious. Linda looked relieved. I did too, until Martin reached the final page. He adjusted his glasses. There's something else. What? He pointed toward several banking documents we'd submitted. I noticed transfers between Mr. Lawson's accounts. I nodded. So, they weren't initiated by him. Linda leaned forward. How can you tell? Because the authorization signatures don't match. He tapped another page. And whoever made the transfers repeatedly accessed the accounts using the same home computer. My stomach dropped. David rarely handled online banking. Sharon did. She'd proudly told everyone she helped her son stay organized. Martin continued. I can't accuse anyone of fraud. He paused. But if someone manipulated financial records while preparing these divorce documents, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Linda and I looked at each other. For months, I'd believed Sharon's greatest weapon was gossip. I had been wrong. She had altered financial records to support her accusations. And this time, the evidence wasn't built on rumors. It was built on timestamps, digital records, certified documents, the kind of facts that don't change because someone tells a convincing story. For the first time since David filed for divorce, I wasn't wondering whether the truth would survive. I was wondering how Sharon planned to explain it. The final hearing began at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. By 8:30, the hallway outside Courtroom 3B was already crowded. Lawyers balanced paper cups of coffee while clients whispered to family members. The familiar sounds of courthouse life copy machines humming shoes clicking across tile floors, bailiffs calling names filled the building. I stood near a window overlooking Fairfax with Linda beside me. You ready? She asked. I took a slow breath. As ready as I'm going to be. She smiled. That's usually enough. I wasn't nervous about telling the truth. I was nervous about what the truth might cost. No matter how the hearing ended, my marriage was over. There would be no happy reunion. No dramatic apology that erased months of distrust. Some things once broken don't fit together the same way again. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. All rise. Judge Bennett entered. Everyone stood. After we were seated, he looked around the room. Counsel, are we prepared to proceed? Both attorneys answered yes. The hearing began. David's attorney spoke first. Unlike the earlier hearings, his tone had changed. Much of the confidence I'd heard before was gone. He briefly mentioned the allegation regarding undisclosed military income. Then Linda stood. Your Honor, before addressing that claim, we'd like to submit certified records from the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, certified IRS transcripts, military retirement documentation, and supporting testimony regarding all compensation received by Mrs. Lawson during her military career. She handed the documents to the bailiff. Judge Bennett reviewed the first pages carefully. The courtroom remained completely quiet. Finally, he looked up. These records appear comprehensive. They are your honor. Linda continued methodically. Every paycheck, every tax filing, every retirement contribution, every pension payment. 20 years of military service reduced to organized stacks of paper. Nothing hidden, nothing missing, nothing resembling the story Sharon had invented. David watched silently. His attorney flipped through the exhibits one after another. Occasionally, he scribbled notes. Occasionally, he stopped writing altogether. Then Linda called our final witness. Martin Alvarez. He walked to the witness stand wearing a dark gray suit, and the calm confidence of a man who had spent decades explaining numbers to skeptical people. After taking the oath, he testified about his career with the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. He explained how military compensation is documented, how retirement benefits are calculated, how payment histories are maintained. Then he looked directly at the judge. "In my professional opinion, Mrs. Lawson's financial disclosures are complete." Judge Bennett nodded. "And the allegation of undisclosed overseas compensation, I found no evidence supporting it." David lowered his eyes. Across the aisle, Sharon shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For the first time all morning, she wasn't smiling. Linda wasn't finished. "Mr. Alvarez, while reviewing the financial records, did you notice anything unrelated to Mrs. Lawson's military income?" "I did." He adjusted his glasses. "I observed several electronic transfers between Mr. Lawson's personal accounts." Linda asked, "Why did those transfers concern you?" "The authorization signatures were inconsistent." He explained how electronic banking logs recorded login times, originating devices, and authorization methods. It wasn't dramatic. It was technical. And because it was technical, it carried weight. The transfers were initiated from the same residential computer on multiple occasions. Linda nodded. "Do the records indicate who was physically sitting at that computer?" "No. They simply identify the device." "Correct." She turned toward David. "Mr. Lawson, who generally handled your online banking." David looked uncomfortable. "My mother." The room became very still. Linda asked another question. "Did you authorize each of those transfers personally?" David hesitated. "I assumed everything she did was correct." "Did you verify the records before signing the financial disclosures filed with this court?" He swallowed. "No." Linda quietly returned to counsel table. She didn't need another question. Judge Bennett looked toward Sharon. "Mrs. Lawson." She straightened immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." "Were you involved in organizing your son's financial documents?" "I was only trying to help." "Please answer the question." "Yes." "Were you responsible for preparing summaries later submitted during these proceedings?" She glanced toward David before answering. "Some of them." Judge Bennett folded his hands. "The documents presented today differ substantially from the certified financial records." Sharon forced a nervous laugh. "Well, anyone can make mistakes." Linda stood again. "Your Honor, may I approach?" She handed the judge another exhibit. "This spreadsheet submitted by the opposing side includes account balances that do not exist in the certified banking records." Judge Bennett compared both documents. His expression didn't change, but his voice became noticeably firmer. "Mrs. Lawson, can you explain these discrepancies?" I was working from memory." "Memory." "Yes," Linda spoke quietly. "The spreadsheet includes exact dollar amounts carried to the penny." No one said another word. Judge Bennett removed his glasses. The court expects accuracy, particularly when making allegations of concealed assets. He looked directly at Sharon. "Unsupported accusations have serious consequences." Sharon opened her mouth, closed it, then stared at the table in front of her. For the first time since I'd met her, she had absolutely nothing to say. The judge dismissed every allegation that I had concealed military income or foreign assets. He ruled that my father's cottage in St. Michael's remained my separate, inherited property. The financial accusations were rejected in their entirety. Then came the words I hadn't expected. "This court is concerned by the submission of inaccurate financial materials and unsupported claims. Counsel is advised that future conduct of this nature may warrant sanctions." He struck the gavel once. The sound echoed through the courtroom. It was over. Not with applause, not with shouting, just the quiet finality of justice doing its job. People began gathering their files. Martin shook my hand before leaving. "Take care of yourself, Colonel." "You too." Linda hugged me. "I'm billing you for making me lose sleep." I laughed. "Fair enough." As we stepped into the hallway, David caught up with us. "Rebecca." Linda quietly walked ahead, giving us space. David looked older than he had a few months earlier. Not because of time. Because regret has a way of changing a person's face. "I'm sorry." I waited. "I should have believed you." His voice cracked slightly. "I kept thinking Mom couldn't possibly be wrong." I nodded slowly. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness." "I appreciate that." He looked at me for a long moment. "I don't think I ever really asked who you were." I smiled sadly. "No. You just loved me." "So did you." For a while, anyway. He lowered his head. "I hope someday you remember the good years." "I will. And the rest." I'll leave them here. I gently tapped the courthouse wall beside us. He understood. Without another word, he walked away. I never saw Sharon again. A few months later, I heard she had quietly withdrawn from several volunteer organizations after word spread about the hearing. No one celebrated that, certainly not me. Public embarrassment has a long shadow, and I had no interest in making it longer. I kept the cottage. That first autumn after the divorce, I spent weekends repairing the porch my father and I used to sit on together. I painted the railings, replaced loose boards, and watched the sun come up over the water with a cup of coffee in my hands. Eventually, I also started volunteering with a nonprofit that helped military attorneys transition into civilian careers. Many of them struggled with the same thing I had, leaving behind a title that once defined their lives. I always told them the same thing. Your rank was part of your story. It was never the whole story. Looking back now, I don't think revenge was what brought me peace. The real victory came from refusing to become the person Sharon believed I was. I didn't need to humiliate her. The truth spoke clearly enough on its own. If you've ever been underestimated or judged before someone knew your story, I hope this reminds you that quiet strength is still strength. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope you'll join me again for another story.